Zack Snyder is good or bad, like him or not, he is the director of the moment, and he's had two big triumphs. You may not like these stories, but the Snyder Cut and Army of the Dead do seem wildly successful. They've appealed to a very big audience. And I do like Snyder, although I'm very discriminating in what I do like and don't like about him. This has been reported for a little bit of time, and he's confirmed this. So we're just going to get to the news portion and then get to the interpretation, which is what if Zack Snyder did a Star Wars film? And he has been positive about this, but whether it will happen is unclear. What's interesting and new, however, is people have sort of misinterpreted. So, what's the story? Well, essentially, Zach pitched to Lucas, George Lucas, again, not Kathleen Kennedy. This is during the Lucas era, that right after the prequel trilogy ended, he wanted to do his own Star Wars project. Because, again, the prequels, like it or not, were really badly received by most people, even by a lot of critics. So it kind of polarized the Star Wars audience at the time, and he wanted to come in and do his own project and fix it. He hasn't given details about what he would have done, but that would have been the basic mandate. It's sort of like, okay, the audiences are a little bit mixed with what you did with the prequels. Just let me in, let me do a kind of Jedi story. Allegedly, it was going to be very Kurosawa in orientation, and then do a story like that. Again, no major details about what the story would be, but that was the basic pitch. And apparently George Lucas did listen to it and was into it, but they never proceeded with it. Now, move on a couple of years, and Kathleen Kennedy and Disney become involved. KK is the head of Lucasfilms now. Apparently the pitch kept going, and Zach just pitched it again, and they were very receptive to it. But it just never went forward. And of course, by then he was very, very busy with the DC projects and probably couldn't just commit to it. So whether he ever really had a script ready or whether he was going to be just producing it or try to do both and somehow fit it in between the other projects, we'll never know. What's interesting though is that this has gotten sort of mixed reception from various people. Of course, if you're a Snyder fan, this feels really fascinating in terms of what he would do with that universe, because you think his Snyderverse within the DCU was an interesting idea and a good idea. But the other side of the table is if you don't like Snyder, you think like he's a cancer and the DCU at least is getting better without him. Even if you do admire the Snyder Cut from a fan angle, right? It's good that the fans got the Snyder Cut. Okay, that's fine. That was him. It's good he got that out of his system. Now that that trilogy is over, let's move on. Let's not revisit that. Let's try to go somewhere else. But in terms of interpreting this, I'm kind of mixed because I do like this in principle. If he did something like Rogue One, which people forget did make $1 billion, it really was very popular. And it actually is even very admired by critics and audiences. Still, some people like it, some people don't. It's a little too boring, it's a little too meta, it's a little bit too dark. You can see kind of the Snyder kind of place we could go with it. But I like Rogue One. I like revisiting it, though it may not be the greatest thing in the universe. I do think something like that would be very appealing, where Zack can take some of the old characters, do his own thing. It's tied to the saga, but you don't really have to watch it. You can just enjoy the saga films on their own terms and not really see the spin-off films. But they do add to the lore, and it's a visual medium, and that's where Zack really thrives. But some people are fairly negative about this and just don't see any redeeming factor because they just see the whole canon of his films and just see, the dark, murky stuff and just as a failure as a writer and as a storyteller.
Easiest stories to tell, and it sucked. Like, I'm sorry, Batman vs Superman sucked. It's not a good movie. So him doing Star Wars, and what upset me is that he even said something like, I can fix that. Like, I don't like the prequels, but for some reason that like genuinely upset me that he looked at the prequel trilogy, he looked at the state of Star Wars and was like, I can fix that. Go fuck yourself, bro. You can't even make a good DC trilogy, and you're telling me that you can fix Star Wars? I mean, I know I may be cynical, I may be too harsh on our boy Zach. I think he's a very nice guy, very nice person. I enjoy hearing him talk about filmmaking. But boy, do I not like his movies. And I really don't think his Star Wars film would have been great. And after looking at the state of the DC films and his Army of the Dead movie and the 300 movies, both of those, it's like, do you really want this guy directing a Star Wars movie? Maybe about 10 years ago, I would have. Zack Snyder has a very, comic book feel to all his movies, where you look at it and you're like, oh, that's cool. But in terms of story, in terms of quality, it's, not that good. So, cool, but not good. Maybe that's the phrase I'll go for Zack Snyder from now on. But tell me your
What I find interesting, though, is that I actually do like the prequels a lot, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the attitude of coming in that, quote, I can fix it or fix them or fix the reception of them. Because while I do have my issues with the prequels at various levels, I do have my own criticisms of it. I just don't buy the criticism that it's the worst thing ever or the worst films ever. There's a lot of good things going on with Phantom Menace, a lot of good things going on with Attack of the Clones, and probably Revenge of the Sith, which I have the most problems with. Even there, I do admire what Lucas was trying to do, even though I think it mostly was a failure. There's still a lot of great elements and a lot of great stuff, especially visually, just the way the droids are done, what the ships are designed, some of the action scenes and some of the battle scenes. It just seems like it just didn't come together, and that's why it's so divisive for many people, is because there's so many good elements in them, but just as cohesive stories, there's so many problems. Now, you might think Zack is the worst one, and we're just having a nightmare of nightmares by having already a polarizing franchise like Star Wars and a polarizing director. However, I think even with the films I do have problems with, like BVS or Watchmen or even 300, there is a cohesiveness. I may not like the message because I know the books too much. I know comic books way too well. So I always feel a little annoyed that he's departing a little bit too much from Alan Moore. But nevertheless, I can say the films do say something. There is a subtext. I know people just think he does really pretty visual images. No, Snyder is trying to say something, but he is a very particular director. So if you are into his style, and I am, I can at least try to give him the benefit of the doubt, even if the films are not the greatest things in the world. I do think overall they're pretty strong, but they may not be just for me. I don't like going back to them. But then he does other films like Man of Steel or Justice League or even now Army of the Dead, and I can see myself seeing them quite a few times and not liking the whole thing, but certain sections of them are very, very strong. So in terms of cohesiveness, I actually think it's the opposite. People think he can just do the visuals but not do the writing. I think on both things he's very good, but he will be very excessive with his style, and he'll just go too far in one direction or the other, and the results will always be like that. Sometimes you'll be really enjoying where he's going to go, or other times you're like, well, I respect what you were trying to do, but I just don't think this was the right approach. But I think with the Star Wars universe, it's big enough that it could encompass somebody like Snyder. But at this point, I'd imagine he wants a lot of creative control and will not settle for anything less. And at least with KK, that's not going to happen. She wants certain restrictions. But again, her era is ending, good or bad. Now, with Filoni, I don't know. Would he be willing to give the confidence to Snyder to let him do his own thing? I know with Ryan Johnson, they're both friends, so I'm still hopeful that trilogy is going to happen. But with Snyder, it's a very, very open question. But I do think it is correct to say that there is a kind of comparison to Ryan Johnson, but not in the way that people think, because good or bad, Ryan really does like to both write and direct his films. But Snyder is a little bit more collaborative, and I'm hopeful if he did have enough good screenwriters or somebody not constraining him but refining his style, it might end up in a very strong place. So I'm actually hopeful it will happen. Probably it won't, but I think Snyder fans should press for it because I do think it would be a really interesting project. And if it has a very Kurosawa edge or homage, I think that would be very, very interesting on many levels. All right, this has been Star Wars Analyzed on the possible Zack Snyder Star Wars. Thanks for listening.